Good morning, everyone. And I know it doesn't feel like it's morning in some places. Sometimes it looks like it's 3 o'clock in the afternoon. But whenever you get tired, try that little trick. Just switch around to say good morning and start your whole day that way. We have a wonderful guest today, and I think you're going to find because of his wealth of knowledge and the amount of things that he shares in some of his writings and his books, you're going to be blown away. Mr. Thornton, Paul Thornton, is with us today. He's written quite a few books, as Malcolm talked about in the introduction. But let's just jump into it. Paul, thank you very much for joining us. I hope it's okay to call you Paul. I
Yeah,
didn't
no,
ask
that's
you that.
sure. No, that's fine. That's fine.
Fantastic. How are you today, sir?
I'm doing good. I live in Massachusetts and it's a beautiful day here, so all is
I want to ask you a question because there's a book that you wrote that I
yep.
got a hold of and it's just been driving me crazy. But before I ask you some of these questions around this book, I want to ask you if we went online, if people go online, we'll give you everybody the addresses and things like that so they can. And after they've read through everything, what's one thing that maybe is not online that's about you that help us get to know you a little bit better, whether it's professionally or personally? What's that one thing that you say, okay, listen, that didn't cover that, but here's something that might be of interest about me or my company?
One thing that is I think is I played hockey in high school and college, and my interest in hockey in high school got me interested in leadership. Our team was always in the middle of the pack. We did okay, but we didn't do great. And it got me wondering, why was there certain teams that always were one or two in our league? And I concluded it was the coaches. I
Hmm.
thought, what are the coaches doing differently than my coach? And that kind of stimulated my interest and pursuit of what do the great coaches do? How do they coach differently? How do they bring out the best in people? That type of thing. So that kind of got me interested in leadership and coaching and teaching and what have you. And that was my initial spark of interest in this whole subject area.
Okay. And you coached hockey for a while too, is that correct?
I did, yeah. I
Yeah.
played in college, as I mentioned, and I coached for a few years. And one thing I found is you can have a lot of theories and models and concepts, but when you have to actually coach and do it, it's a different ball game. So I learned a lot as a coach.
So I laugh because when you said that, that's how I felt about being a parent. I had all the great
Yeah,
models and we're just
yeah,
fine. And it
yeah.
didn't quite work
Same
out
thing.
that way. Yeah. It didn't
Yeah,
quite work out
yeah,
that way.
yeah.
Now, of the books you've written, which one is your favorite? And tell me a little bit why, because I have a question concerning the one about perfecting your approach and style. Which one of your books is your favorite?
I actually just finished a book that it ties into some of the previous ones I've written, but I'm a big believer that there are basically three styles of managing or leading, and those are directing, discussing, and delegating, the three
Okay.
Ds.
Okay.
So a
Like that.
lot of my career and a lot of my in teaching and being a parent for that matter, I have relied on those three styles to get things done, to develop and work with people, to hold people accountable, to coach them, teach them, all that. So that's my big idea of what an effective leader needs to do. They need to be really good at those three things.
Okay, and I tend to agree with that, and that's probably why I gravitated toward it's called perfecting your approach and
Mhm.
style just as needed. And talked about a couple of chapters in there that grabbed my attention. Of course, we'll have all the links and everything up in the description. So, description if you're looking at it on YouTube or LinkedIn, leaders, this is a solution type based book. But Paul, can you, when you start talking about this idea of leadership styles and understanding your leadership style. But it's almost like we're saying, I have to fill in, lay out the 3Ds. That's
Mhm.
kind of the operating system, so to speak. But when you talk about leadership styles, can you give us a rough idea about what you mean there?
Yeah, I think it has to do with how do you interact, how do you engage, how do you motivate,
Mm,
how do you connect with people, I guess is one way to look at it. But your style also indicates how do you get things done. Directing style, you're telling people what to do, how to do it, when to have it done by. Discussing, you're asking questions, you're finding out what do they think, what are their ideas. Delegating, you're empowering them to take action, work independently, and get the task done. So to me, style is the approach you use to interact with people and connect with them. Build relationships is a big part of being a leader, and also getting things done. So those two things maybe are the two biggies there.
So when we talk about the style of leadership, we're talking about the weight you put on one of the three Ds, it sounds like. Because that's what I'm taking from it. If you're going to delegate, that's a certain amount of, that gets more weight, more attention than being a directive type of leader. How do you know? Because you have a chapter where you talk about providing the right amount.
Yeah.
How do you
Yeah,
know about that?
that's a good question. And you mentioned being a parent, and I'm a parent also. And raising kids, I think we use all three styles. Sometimes we're directing, sometimes we discuss and ask questions, sometimes we delegate. But I found that sometimes you can do too much or too little. For example, sometimes or some leaders are too direct with people. They're too candid, they're too in the person's face, so to speak. They're not, sometimes you got to plant seeds, sometimes you got to be a little softer in your approach. So you can be too direct or not direct enough. There's a fine line there between being too direct or not direct enough. Same thing with discussion. Discussions are great, and you need to ask good questions and have a good discussion and get people involved. But at some point, you got to make a decision. And I've seen some leaders, we've all been in those meetings that go on, and the leader is really not making timely decisions to move the
Stop,
ball forward.
stop talking about me. Don't talk about me. We're talking about
And last one, delegating. Some people under delegate, they don't delegate enough. Some people over delegate to their top performers. They keep giving the top performer more and more things to do and burn them out. So again, there's a fine line there too of don't over delegate, but don't under delegate. Finding that optimal point of providing just the right amount of whatever it is you're doing is really critical.
is it just a feel kind of thing? How do you, that self awareness that comes up oftentimes now in emotional intelligence, is it just awareness, or is there some kind of keys or cues out there? See, it just feels to me it's just self aware enough to
Yeah.
realize the effect I'm having on somebody else. But do you have an input with that?
Yeah, I think it awareness of what you're doing. If I'm delegating something to one of my employees, am I checking in with them to see what they think? Am I asking them, are you okay? Is your plate overflowing? You have too much going on right now? Do I need to take a few things back? What do I need to do? Discussion, reading people's body language. Are they getting bored with the conversation? Are they looking at their cell phone? Are they tuning out? So little subtle, I don't know, signals and awarenesses can indicate to you, the leader, that maybe I'm doing too much or too little, and maybe I got to tweak my approach a bit and change it up a little bit. But getting feedback from the people you're leading also. Again, as a parent, getting feedback from your kids. My direction's clear. Did you understand exactly what I wanted you to do? We just had this discussion. What's your takeaway? What did you get from this discussion, and what actions are you going to take? So some two-way dialogue is important to see if you're coming across the right way, they're getting it, it's clear. That's all important.
So when you talk about this idea of two-way conversation and feedback, even fight, take it out of the realm of being a parent. Oftentimes, I've noticed other leaders do not want to seek feedback. Number one, it might hurt their feelings, but number two, they feel like that's giving away too much of their authority, their power. How would you coach somebody who's coming at it from that angle?
I think with feedback, let's take the directing style again. You're telling someone what to do, how to do it, when to have it done by. Getting feedback from them there is, do you understand what you need to do? Is it clear? So I might say to the person, in your own words, tell me how you're going to proceed or what steps are you going to take. So I want to make sure they understand exactly what they need to do. In a discussion, getting feedback could be probing a bit about why they asked that particular point or why they made that particular point or why they think we should go in this direction or that direction or why they think the solution to the problem is thus and so probing questions to get their insights and their rationale for what they're suggesting is important. I think feedback's really important to make sure A, you're coming across the way you hope, and B, people are understanding precisely what needs to be done, how it should be done, or whether you're empowering them to decide how to get it done.
That leads me to a kind of a different direction question. Did you find much difference in the leadership of a hockey team, coaching that, and then coaching the business world? It seemed like to me there would be a difference, but it seemed like maybe there shouldn't be a difference.
I think there's a lot of similarities between leading
The
hockey
sport, yeah.
teams,
Mhm.
students in the classroom, being a parent. In all of these cases, you're trying to help the person achieve their potential,
Mm.
trying to do what you can to bring out the best in them. And you're using, again, going back to the three styles, you're using a style that's going to help them grow and develop as well. And depending on what style you use, the person's going to learn certain things. If I'm using a directing style, hopefully the person is learning to listen, to pay attention, to follow directions. If I'm using a discussing style, the person's learning how to think because I'm asking them, what do you think? What should we do? Why? What's your opinion? So they got to learn to think and formulate their opinions and present them in a convincing, cogent way. Delegating, they're learning to work independently. It's really
Mhm.
their decision on what they're going to do, how they're going to do it, that type of thing. So I'm a big believer that no matter what domain you're working in, coach, teacher, parent, manager, leading a team of some sort in the business world, these principles are really consistent throughout.
Okay. Okay. Let me have you coach me up just a little bit on this
Yeah.
because, as well, to paraphrase and see if I'm paraphrasing it right. Because when you're going through this, I started thinking a sports team, you would coach them differently because they're working to defeat the habits of their body. They're working to improve their body. They're working to take control of their body. But
Mhm.
yet, if you have a group of developers, they're working to take control of the thought process, the mental process. So you'd have to balance the three differently based upon that. And it could even go deeper. If I have a bunch of new hires of first real jobs, I got to develop them for physically knowing to be on work at time and do their best while they're on the job. And so I got to balance that out. Is that kind of what you point toward?
I think if I'm coaching a group of hockey players, let's say, I'm coaching their head. I want to coach the way they think about the game and what they're doing on the ice and decision making and what have you. I'm also coaching them to prepare their bodies to get stronger and condition them and that type of thing. Their spirit in terms of their motivation and excitement and energy and emotions about making sure they're not too emotional, but they're not there's no emotion. You want them to
Right.
be emotionally engaged and what have you. So, depending on the situation, I could be leading and using one of these styles, connecting with the head or the heart, let's say. And that's carries over, I think, to the business world as well. If I'm leading a team in the business world, I have to make sure they understand intellectually what they need to do, but also I got to make sure I connect with their emotions and their heart. They came
Mm-hmm.
to the mission, they're excited about it. If it's just a ho hum, we're going to do XYZ, and there's no excitement or energy around it, I'm not going to get them to perform at their best. It's going to be a hard. There's a lot of talk about connecting with the head and heart, and I think that's really important. So making sure your mission and your purpose and all that is something that's engaging and gets them excited.
Yeah. And that's a hard thing to do, I think, because in order to get them excited, they have to feel like taking ownership and some of the
Yeah.
other things that skills and things that you refer to. But I
Yep.
think one of the hardest skills or hardest things that we have to work with, And I think you did this very well. And it's a can of worms. Change. When we start talking about change,
Yeah.
tell us your philosophy and why you wrote about it in your books, what you do.
I think it's a really important subject. And a lot of the studies have found that a lot of change initiatives don't succeed, they don't produce the desired results. And so I tried to figure out, why is that? What's going wrong? Why does it fall apart? Or why does the change agent or leader not accomplish what they had hoped to accomplish? And I was involved with some major change initiatives in my career. And in some cases, it comes down to answering some really basic questions. And one of them that I found was very basic: is who has to change, first of all? What group of people? Is it the middle managers? Is it all employees in the company? Who exactly has to change? And the second question is, what specifically do they need to do differently? How do they need to change their behavior? I was working with a vice president in marketing role one time, and he said to me, I was in training and development, and he said to me, I want my sales reps to be world class. And I said, okay, that's great. I said, what does world class look like? What does that
Mm.
mean? And he had a blank and he didn't have an answer to my question. I said, I don't know what world class means to you. I'm not sure what you're expecting to accomplish, but you got to start with, what exactly do you want them to start doing that they're not doing today? And as basic as that question sounds, it's very important. And I've also heard lots of leaders talking, our employees need to be more entrepreneurial. And I say, okay, great. What does that mean?
Yeah.
Or we need to have a culture that's customer focused. Great idea. Tell me exactly, what does that mean? What does that look like? How will people behave differently next week? Or what do you want them to be doing differently next week? And a lot of those basic questions, the senior leader can't answer precisely the change that they want to make. So things often fall apart right there. So I would always question and probe and get them to define very precisely, what change do you want to make? And then the question is this group of people that needs to change, are they able to change, and are they willing? Able and willing, I think, are really important, because sometimes they're not able, so you got to provide training and mentoring and coaching. Sometimes they're not willing, they're not motivated, their plate's already overflowing with 28 other things they're doing. There's just so much going on in their world that they can't take on another change initiative. Sorting that out and being realistic about what changes will work and what can they handle and how much change is appropriate, and that's really important. And then, of course, having a good plan to make it happen. People don't just change because you tell them to change. You need a plan. It needs to be well thought out. It normally involves training, incentives, support. So there's a lot of pieces to the puzzle to make the change successful.
Okay. And yeah, there is a lot of small pieces in there and big pieces in there. It requires a lot of leadership training. Actually, just had a conversation with a person who says she's going to tune into this when it gets done, because we start talking about being able to identify opportunities to improve. I'm going to lead a change situation. Where do
Yeah.
you think I need to kind of, just as a general rule, because I know you would look at each individual and say, okay, you're weak here, you're weak there.
Yeah.
But as a general rule, general,
Yep.
gross rule, what needs to be changed?
I think as a leader, as a parent, teacher, again, you're always looking for opportunities to improve the current situation. So, with that in mind, you're always thinking about and trying to identify what changes would help improve the process, the way we do things, our procedures. What changes could people make to be more efficient, more effective in their day-to-day work? So it's a headset or a mental model that the leader has of always looking at things that way. They're not happy with the status quo. They want to find a way to make things better. As a parent, we want that with our kids. We're trying to help them grow and develop. As a team leader, we're trying to help the team be more efficient and productive. Every coach I know is trying to help the team perform better and win more games. It's just part of what a leader does. But one thing there is I found some leaders, they identify 12 things that we need to work on to improve. And again, that's 12 changes and it's too much.
Yep.
People can't absorb that. It's like saying to your kid, here's 12 things you need to start doing differently. And they're looking at you like, what are you, crazy? You got to pinpoint one or two changes that would
There
have
you
the
go.
biggest impact.
Totally agree.
We just don't have the capacity, time, energy, money, resources to do more than one or two things that will move the needle and help the group perform at a higher level.
Totally agree with that. Totally
Yeah.
agree with that. Oftentimes we as leaders want too much. We take on too much. We try to
Yeah.
we don't want too much. We expect too much. Forgetting the human condition. Yeah, we don't know what you could achieve, but we do know that you can only focus on one thing at a time.
Mm-hmm.
Multitasking is not a good thing, and especially when it comes to this type of situations. But I would like for you to just to put it in a concise statement for me. Makes a great leader.
I think someone that, first of all, can diagnose the current situation. And that's one skill that's not talked about too often, but it's like a doctor. A good doctor is able to diagnose the patient, and they're able
Mm,
to identify the right measurements, the tests, the right information, but they're able to diagnose what's the current state of affairs, what's currently going on. And I think a good leader can look at his or her team or department or organization for that matter and diagnose what do they do well, what are some problem areas, what are their strengths, weaknesses, what do the numbers tell us, what's working well. So that's number one. They got to diagnose what's happening. And then number two is what we were just talking about. How do you identify the best opportunities to pursue? What are the one or two big opportunities that you can pursue that would make a big difference in the operation of your team or organization? Number three is how do you as a leader present that? How do you make your case? You got to be compelling. You got to be convincing. You have to have passion for your idea. And then number four is how do you then plan and implement whatever change you're going to put in place? To me,
wow.
those four things are really important and necessary and needed to be an effective leader. And I think leadership is a process. And I think those are the four steps that you got to take to make it happen.
You know,
Diagnose. Yeah.
yeah. It's the 3Ds again, right?
No, it's not quite the 3Ds. This is more like, this is another book I wrote on the leadership process, and it really goes into these 4 points of diagnose, determine opportunities, make your case, present your message, and then 4, implement your idea.
Okay, okay. I haven't had a chance to review that book, so I will.
Yeah.
Because there's, ladies and gentlemen, like I said in the notes, you'll find some great information, great direction to go to and get those notes in those books. But I want to also just ask you something else that stuck out to me
Yeah.
that I'd like for you just to maybe spend a little bit of time talking about. You have this belief that if your leadership style is right and you're doing the right things, you're going to help develop people.
Yep.
I have
I
a
do.
belief that that's the number one job of a leader is to develop your team. That's the
Mm-hmm.
number one job, bar none. Tell us a
Mm-hmm.
little bit about that, if you will, please.
I think that is very accurate, and I think it's easier said than done.
Oh, yeah.
I think when you diagnose where your team's at, you come up with the right thing that will help the team advance. Sometimes teams need a pat in the back. Sometimes they need a new challenge. Sometimes they need extra motivation. So it's what can I do as a leader to bring out the best in a particular person or player, or what can I do for the whole team? What do I need to do? And figuring out what style and approach to use is important. Sometimes saying to the team or delegating something to them or empowering them is going to help them assume more ownership and take on the mantle and lead themselves.
Yeah.
But other times, being direct and telling them, okay, look, here's the challenge. This is what we got to do. We got to improve productivity by 30%. And here's why we have to do it. And I'm confident we can do it. And here's the plan and blah, blah, blah. So
Mm.
figuring out what's needed, what's going to motivate them, engage them, excite them. If you have a really experienced group of people, let me go back to parenting. if
Okay.
if you raised your kids and they develop the right values and learn the right things along the way, when they're age 29, it's hard to be directing and telling them they have to go and get a haircut or they got to go and do this or that. They should have learned those things earlier in life. And your approach at that point is you're delegating to them, you're empowering them. You want them to manage their own life. You want them to make decisions and take responsibility and be accountable, et cetera, et cetera.
Okay.
Yeah, but I agree, Glenn. Using the right style will help the person grow and develop and advance and get better at what they're doing. I think that's really important.
Okay, I agree with that. I do want to ask you something though, because you're making a big contribution, but what are you doing right now? What are you doing right now to help us leaders get better?
I keep writing books. I'm a big student of leadership as well as I try to be a good teacher of leadership. So I write a lot. On LinkedIn, I try to post something almost every day. I also do podcasts and I do some training programs here and there. So I guess the biggest thing I do is writing. I write
Okay.
articles, I write books. I contribute to the leader brief in leadership. I don't know, it's not a podcast, it's a written correspondence that comes out
Okay.
every few days. Yeah.
Is that a
So,
LinkedIn?
is it what?
Is that LinkedIn that the leadership brief is
Oh,
on?
no, it's not on LinkedIn. It's a separate entity. I'm not sure who exactly they're affiliated with, but
Okay. I asked that because I didn't remember seeing that, and
yeah.
I'm trying to. My coach has told me to get all over LinkedIn and start reading more from people like you on
Mhm.
LinkedIn,
Yeah.
responding more. Okay, cool. So now you said you do some workshops, or you haven't for a while. But if someone decided, hey, I need you to come in and speak to my leadership skills, how would they contact you through your own page, or do you have a better way for them to contact you?
No, that's probably the best thing. The LinkedIn page. My email address is pbthornton74@gmail.com, but my LinkedIn page has that information. I don't, to be honest with you, I don't do a lot of training, but I do some. I went to Kuwait a while back and I went to Dubai. A CEO of a company in Dubai read my book and he liked it on alignment and he had me go over to Dubai and do some training programs over there. And so it was a unique experience to travel all the way over there and see
Yeah.
that country and different world, different culture, and a whole different ball game.
Way off the subject.
Yeah.
How different was the culture? How did you find it? Did you find it because I didn't
Well,
care for it?
what I found was I was worked in a major corporation in the US and we were very much action oriented in terms of a new, let's say you're putting in a new performance appraisal system in your company. Company I worked at, it would be like in the next 90 days, we want to have this implemented, we want to have it up and running, we want to have it operational. In Dubai, they were putting in a new performance appraisal system, but they were much more concerned with getting everybody comfortable with it and everybody kind of feeling good about it. And they were going to take about a year and a half to 2 years to implement this new performance appraisal system. And the difference there was striking to me. And
Yes, me too.
they
Absolutely.
move very slowly with change and they want to get everyone bought into it and comfortable with it and fully acclimated to it. And it's just a whole different approach. I was like blown away with how patient they were and slowly moving. It's incredible.
Yeah, yeah. And see, that's the difference in
Yeah.
perspectives. You saw it as
Yeah.
patience. I just saw it as being lazy. And but I see where it is a patience issue. They want to make sure everybody's
Yeah.
really comfortable with it.
Yeah. Yeah. And I was dealing with a lot of technical engineers that were educated in India and had gravitated to Dubai and were working at this company. So, a highly educated group, but again, very patient and willing to get everyone comfortable with the change before fully implementing it. It was just a
Mm-hmm.
very different.
Yeah,
So,
very much
anyway,
so. What questions, and I try to respect people's time and try to
yeah,
stay right around the 35-minute mark, but and I apologize, so we're going to go past that. But I
yeah.
want to ask you, what questions should I have asked you? What questions should I have asked you that I didn't ask you?
I think you asked me a lot of good questions, Glenn, and I think the big ideas we hit on, the three D's, I think are big, and the process is important. Perhaps one area we didn't talk too much about is alignment. And I think
Mm,
alignment is an important topic that high performing organizations, high performing teams, they have alignment around, I think, two things: their strategy and their values. And I think it's really important, again, for the leader or the senior leadership team to make sure they're clear
mhm.
on what strategy they're using, and all the pieces are aligned in supporting the strategy and the company values. I think that's really big for me. I think a lot of
Yeah,
times
yeah.
underperforming organizations don't have the alignment they need. The people don't have the right skills, or the systems don't work the way they should, or people aren't getting the information when they need it to perform at their best. So you have misalignments here and there, and the organization doesn't perform the way it should.
Or could. Yeah.
Yeah.
I wonder about that alignment piece. If I can ask a follow-on question again, I
Yeah.
apologize to all those folks who expect us
Yeah.
to be in and out in 35 minutes. Get over it. Just say good morning. That's what it's going to be. But here's the question I have: when we talk about alignment, and if you find any part of the organization out of alignment, does that generally start at the top with not being aligned with what the purpose and the mission of the organization?
I think let's go back to what we were talking about before with leading change. I
Okay.
think the senior leadership team, I think, needs to do two things. One, they need to challenge and lead change. So they're challenging the organization to think differently, act differently, to be more effective, to be more efficient, et cetera. So they're almost creating misalignment, because when you challenge people to think differently, behave
Excellent
differently,
point.
you're creating misalignment. So
Excellent point.
you create misalignment, but then you also need to take action to align the pieces. So it's this balancing act between those two things that the leadership team needs to be constantly working with. Again, like a parent, at times we challenge our kids to take on something bigger, to be more responsible, to take on a bigger role in their day to day life. So that can create some misalignment. They're not sure, and maybe they lack some of the skills. And so there's issues there. So part of what we're doing as a parent is then trying to figure out, okay, what skills can I help my child learn and develop so they'll be more capable of taking on this bigger challenge and this bigger
Hmm.
opportunity. So it's
That's
a
a really, really good point. Go
balancing
ahead.
between those two things.
Yeah,
Um,
that's such a powerful point. And that's
yeah,
also, that bleeds back to our conversation just a minute ago about culture difference.
yeah,
That's a powerful point. I mean, their
yeah.
culture demands that they balance it slower than what we try to balance things
Yeah,
out.
yeah. And as some people say, if you move slowly and get everyone to buy into it, when you come to implement it, it'll be a lot smoother and it'll work out a lot better. Other people say, we can't wait 2 years to implement something. We got to move quickly. You got to be first to market. You got to act quickly. And so waiting 90 days even in some organizations is no, we need to get it done tomorrow.
Yeah, forgetting the fact that if they have a smooth implementation of it, it goes by
Yeah.
faster than if they didn't. Perfect, perfect. Hey, I want to give you the last word, but before I do that, I want to just say thank you. Your breadth of knowledge is absolutely impressive. As one of these podcasts where I think we're starting to discuss solutions
Yeah.
to being a great leader and understanding your role as a developer. I thank you for that. Like I like to do is try to give you the last word. And
Glenn, I appreciate you having me on. I think leadership is really an important topic. I've spent my life thinking about it, reading about it, observing
mm,
leaders. I think it's something there's always something new to learn. So it's a lifelong journey. And I think people that want to become good leaders need to put their time and effort into it. They need a development plan. They got to keep working at it. One thing I used to do earlier in my career is I would observe a lot of other leaders and look at what they were doing and ask myself, okay, if I was in that situation, what would I do? How
mm.
would I handle that? If it was in a meeting or dealing one-on-one with someone or giving someone some negative feedback. So you can also do a lot of reflection on what is the leader doing that I'm observing and what would I do? How would I do it differently? Or would I do the same thing he or she's doing? But it's one of those, leadership is one of those things that it's a lifelong endeavor and it's a never ending process. Buy one of my books and read it and see what you think.
Oh, yeah. I said you got last word, ladies and gentlemen. I read a lot, and I think you should read a couple books every now and then. A book comes across our program. It's a surprise to me. So I hope you do the same thing.
Mm,
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Thornton. I appreciate it a whole lot. Have a great rest of the week. It's early, and
thank
have a
you.
great rest of the day. Remember, it's morning time.
All right. Thanks again for having me on.
Okay.
Bye bye.